We are live. Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone, or evening or morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this special event on the Charismatic Encounters Charisma Project. I'm Harry Eckman, CEO of the World Cetacean Alliance, and we're one of the partners of this project alongside the Universities of Leeds and Paris Nanterre. The project itself, I'm joined today by Jérémie Brugidou and Fabien Clouette and Sophia Nicolov. I'll introduce them more in a moment, but let me just give you a little bit of background about the project that our speakers today, our presenters today, are going to be delving into a little bit more detail on. So the purpose of the Charismatic Encounters project is to understand the role of cetaceans in coastal and maritime heritage of England and France, and specifically two regions, the Yorkshire Coast and the Basque Country. Now, when you normally think of whaling and whale watching, these are not typically areas that you would think of, but they do have an incredible heritage and history. And so unraveling that and unveiling that through this project has been really fascinating. So the research for the project focuses on the central role of whales and other cetaceans, dolphins and porpoises, and the role they've played in English and French coastal maritime heritage. But more than simply examining the past, the project looks at how this history could be used for both countries' contemporary whale watching industries for the benefit of the local communities. And so the relationship between whale hunting in the past and whale watching in the present is a very complex one, but an important factor for the future of responsible whale tourism. And that depends on the lessons learned from past exploitation. And so looking at the past to try and address and protect animals in the future is one of the hopeful outcomes of this project. Another one of the aims is of the project is to build this cooperative network of stakeholders in both regions, France and England, such as whale watching tour operators or environmental NGOs, maritime museums, or simply members of the local seafaring community to gather and learn from the information that's held within these communities. And so this afternoon, we're going to be diving into this project into some fascinating detail with our three presenters. Dr. Sophia Nicolov is going to be talking about her work collecting oral histories in Yorkshire. And then Dr. Fabien Clouette and Dr. Jérémie Brugidou are going to be talking about their work on making a documentary film in the Basque Country. Now, depending on the time that we've got, we might be able to answer some questions if you have them as an audience, as viewers out there. So if you do have any questions through at any point during the presentations from Sophia, Jérémie, and Fabien, do pop them in the comments, and if we have time, we will be able to answer them. If we run out of time, we will just collate those questions and get them answered after the event. So let's start with our first presenter. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sophia Nicolov from the University of Leeds. Sophia is a marine environmental historian whose research has explored the entangled histories of humans and whales. And I love the word entangled there. Her research focuses on cultural responses to whale strandings and the tangible and intangible legacies of whaling and extinction and recovery narratives and ocean conservation efforts. She completed a PhD in the University of Leeds, which focused on grey whale strandings in the Pacific Northwest. And this afternoon, Sophia is going to tell us about collecting oral histories in Yorkshire and how they help shed light on the role that whales, dolphins, and porpoises in Yorkshire's marine environment heritage. So, Sophia, please, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks for that introduction. I will now try and share my screen. I think right. Sorry. I think is that working?
Can't see anything yet.
Oh dear. Sorry.
Almost there. Here we go. I'm seeing a little swirly wheel. That is always a good sign.
Sorry.
That's all right.
My laptop has decided to really play up this afternoon.
That's right. We can see the presentation now, so that's good.
Okay, that's good. Right, I will try. Why isn't it playing? There we go.
Perfect. There we go.
Is that full screen now?
Absolutely. Everybody can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's really great to be here and be here online. We've just had a couple of Whale Week events happening in person in Yorkshire, in Whitby and Hull. So it's really great to get online and be able to kind of share this a bit further afield. So yeah, I will sort of very quickly kind of situate where my research is taking place and kind of the longer historical context, and then try and just jump into the oral histories, because they're really fascinating. And it's impossible to kind of sum up. I'm probably covering about 2% of them, and lots of people that I'm not going to even be able to mention today. But yeah, what's really great about this project is how it's given me an opportunity to really understand how cetaceans have shaped coastal and maritime life and culture and heritage in this region for about 4 centuries. And it probably stretches back even further, but yeah, in terms of that whaling past, which really began in the 1600s, through to thinking about the creatures alive today and whale watching efforts. Where's my PowerPoint? Oh, there it is. Sorry. So yeah, this is just going to situate us within the area that my research is focused on. And the Yorkshire Coast spreads from the Tees Valley up in the north, so where Redcar and Middlesbrough are, and all the way down to Spurn Point, and as it kind of stretches through into the Humber, and which carries you through to the city of Hull, which was obviously one of the most important British whaling ports. Sorry, my computer's having a complete meltdown. Having technical issues. Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know. I might have to just present it like this.
That's okay.
If that's okay. Sorry. Every time I open it, more it sort of crashes, and I'm not sure why.
That's okay. I think we can see it pretty well here.
Yeah, is that okay? Sorry, I would normally like to present it bigger, but my computer seems to be having a meltdown about that.
Okay, I think everyone can see fine.
So yeah, that Yorkshire coast has a really rich whaling history. That legacy plays out today in terms of a kind of cultural identity, and in the museums. You have Hull Maritime Museum and Whitby Museum, where you can see these incredible collections of whaling artifacts and whale bones. But this kind of new layer in the relationship is actually contemporary conservation efforts in the North Sea, and a kind of growing whale watching industry and activities. unfortunately, I can't talk about all these things today because you'd be listening to me for hours. So I will kind of just very briefly touch on that whaling history, because I think it really kind of grounds us in understanding that, you know, almost the psyche, the kind of folk memory in the region. So whaling really accelerated in the 1750s from Hull and Whitby, and they went up to the Arctic with Dutch whalers, and they were hunting the bowhead whale, and Hull became one of the most important whaling ports actually in the whole of the UK, and they were mainly hunting off of Greenland and the Davis Straits later on, until they essentially caused the demise of their own industry through overhunting. This is one of the most famous paintings from that era, from a group called the Hull School, and it depicts this very typical scene up in the Arctic. And that's this longer trajectory, and kind of fast forwarding about 170 years, in the early 2000s, something really incredible happened in Yorkshire, because you started having dedicated whale watching activities. And while the species that you can see off the coast are completely different to the bowhead whales, what I want to emphasize is that this group of animals have been shaping culture, society, economics, and politics, and the lives of coastal people in Yorkshire in different ways for centuries. But in the last 2 decades, the cetaceans off of Yorkshire, which are mainly minke whales, bottlenose dolphins, and harbour porpoises, there's been an ever-growing significance of them in the local communities, and significantly an actual change in the presence and dynamics of the living animals. And it's those changes that really helped foster this whale watching. And it's both formal and informal. You have boats going out, but you also have people standing on the cliff tops, on a good day, and you can see the dolphins, and if you're lucky, you can see the minke whales. And with the changes that have come, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because of particular changes, it's increased awareness and almost increased the kind of local value placed on them. And this is where the oral histories come in. So having quite a few conversations with organisations and individuals in the region, so Bex Lynham at Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, Richard Baines, who runs Yorkshire Coast Nature, among others. One of the things that kept coming up were the shifts in species, and this changing dynamic. And Bex Lynham, the Marine Advocacy Officer for the North Sea Wildlife Trusts, and she's primarily based with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, said cetaceans are something that we very much knew anecdotally were in our waters, and that there was some existing but limited data. So the interesting thing is that official recordings of sightings only really started in the last 5 to 10 years. That's quite a short data set in the kind of grand scheme of things. And while that quantitative data set, the numbers and the sightings, they create a baseline, which is, the key aim. That's quite a short period, and it's a very recent period, and unfortunately it can't take us further back in time. And those overseeing that data collection are very aware, anecdotally, that longer term there have been some really profound changes, and a lot of this is coming from the fishers and the birders who've been watching the sea for decades, who've been working the sea for decades, and they hold huge amounts of knowledge and vital information, which has been kind of gathered over years and years of lived experience and memories and, you know, conversations, and it's really valuable. The problem is that science can't always, you know, science would love to use that anecdotal data, but, you know, when you're working quite strictly within kind of, you know, sightings data, you know, there are limits, and capacity issues. And that's kind of where I thought, well, maybe I can be useful and record some of this anecdotal testimony, and kind of bring my skills as an environmental historian to collecting them, analysing them, you know, thinking through what they reveal. And it offers us an opportunity to go a lot further back in time, to extend that baseline, you know, beyond 10 years, and, you know, just kind of begin to think about what that dynamic in the North Sea is. And yeah, so this is a strand of environmental history that feeds into something called marine historical ecology, which is, you know, it's grounded in science, but they, you know, historical ecologists emphasize the role of humanities and anecdotal data and descriptive data. So that can be anything from journals and diaries, whaling accounts, medieval manuscripts, newspapers, or histories. You know, the descriptive and historical sources. And so thinking, you know, kind of thinking with that, and you know, something that I can do is record oral histories. And I'll start with the minke whales, which are, you know, the most iconic, I think, species on the coast here. They're the largest great whale that regularly visit. They come here year after year, and they're mainly here in August and September. And whale watching activities kind of, I would say, kind of grew up around them, from 2006 with Whitby whale watching, and in 2014 you have Yorkshire Coast Nature, who I mentioned earlier. And Yorkshire Coast Nature run these seabird and whale watching trips from the fishing village of Staithes, which is just slightly further north than Whitby. And Richard Baines is the director, and he runs the trips with Sean Baxter, who is a local fisherman and skipper from Staithes. And they come up quite a few times in this talk because I've worked with them quite a bit. We actually did an event with them on Tuesday, and they've been really key to you know kind of getting to grips with you know what they've witnessed over their lifetime and over the course of these trips. And in 2022, a clifftop count by a birder on the Yorkshire coast recorded, I think, around 82 minke whales on one day. And they used a telescope, and it was hours of watching. And everyone says that this is the highest recording ever. You know, it's an incredible number. But from other conversations, you know, that I've had over time, there's this, people say, I don't remember seeing minke whales when I was younger. You know, I've lived on this coast my whole lifetime. You know, this isn't just a recent change, but it's a longer term change. And Richard Baines, you know, kind of, he says there's definitely been an increase. And it's an interesting change in the 9 years now that he's been running the trips. They're seeing bigger numbers, and that 2022 was, you know, by far the most that they've ever recorded. And he also, you know, expressed to me that these changes go back several decades and kind of over the course of his lifetime. He grew up in North Yorkshire, and he recalls travelling to Bulby Cliffs, which are just above Staithes. They're just on this map here. And he remembers that he would travel there on the bus and to go bird watching, because, you know, he's always been a keen birder. And this is a quote from him, and he he says that all he ever remembers seeing was a porpoise, and that the other birders that he grew up with and are still active on the coast, they don't remember seeing minke whales either. And, you know, I know that there are people who've seen minke whales in the 21st century from the cliff tops. So, you know, there are some, you know, there's something really interesting going on there. And what will become clear while I'm talking is that actually my talk just raises loads of questions and doesn't really kind of answer anything, and kind of highlights that loads more research needs to be done. But this sentiment of kind of, while they were never really around, is reflected by someone called Todd German, who works at Sea Life Scarborough, and he's involved a lot in the seal rehab. And he grew up in a North Yorkshire town called Filey, which is below Whitby. And he doesn't remember seeing minke whales or anyone even really talking about them. Maybe occasionally a stranding, but it would usually be dolphins. And that porpoises are the kind of standout feature. And we know that porpoises have been a part of this North Sea ecosystem off of Yorkshire for centuries because of archaeological findings, so porpoise remains, and written historical accounts from the medieval era. And Todd thinks that it was only in 2013 that he really had his first contact with a minke whale, and you know, he's lived on the coast for a long time. And now thinking about kind of the fisherman's perspective, so Sean Baxter, who I mentioned as the skipper for Richard Bain's trips, he was born in Teesside, which is that top end of North Yorkshire, but he began fishing in staithes at the age of 13. And he did move away for many years in his 20s, but in his late teens, he has some really, really significant memories. First of all, in the 70s, he says he recalls the minke whales being out there. He says, there's always been minkies here. There's always been the herring, there's always been the tuna, and that the herring drives the North Sea for virtually the whole year. And that everything either builds up to the herring or, you know, it kind of happens after the herring. And, you know, Sean really emphasizes the significance of the herring, and Richard Bain's kind of backed this up. And, you know, both say that they're big drivers of the movements of these animals. And that corresponds with the herring ban that happened in the from the late 70s, and it was a 20-year ban. It was a strict ban, and Sean says that, you know, he witnessed the herring increase in number, and that with that herring biomass that's returned, it's not surprising that the whales are there. So yeah, you know, Richard and Sean, you know, they both reflect on the fact that the whales come into the North Sea following these big schools of herring, and they kind of congregate around Staithes and Whitby, you know, this North Yorkshire region. And I think, you know, it's really important to kind of, you know, layer these different kind of aspects of maritime and marine history, and, you know, the impact that fishing has had in the past on multiple species, and what, you know, strict fishing quotas, you know, can potentially result in. And Richard says that it can't just be the herring, it must also be the moratorium on whaling. So the moratorium was obviously in the 1980s, and minke whales, interestingly, you know, they weren't hunted in the same way that the other great whales were. You know, they became the heavy focus, sorry, my cat, they became the heavy kind of focus of whaling in those kind of latter decades of industrial whaling, as the other species like humpbacks and blues were really, you know, decimated. And that's because they're smaller, they have less oil, less meat. So yeah, he thinks that potentially that moratorium, and you know, Iceland and Norway, while they hunt them to a still a little bit, you don't have that industrial scale whaling, and that those two things together, that can have the potential to have a big impact on a population like the minke whales. And he wonders, does it represent minke whales moving back into territories that they used to frequent? Are they returning to coastal waters now that those threats of whaling aren't so bad? Or is this a new normal? Is it just because the population is increasing again? You have them opportunistically foraging and expanding. Obviously, these are really big questions, and it will require kind of interdisciplinary research in the future. But minke whales, despite having quite a large population, are one of the most under-researched species out there, which is crazy to think. But the other big change are the bottlenose dolphins, and this is the one that everyone talks about, and is kind of like, there just did not used to be bottlenose dolphins. 5 years ago, you might see one occasionally. Yeah, 5 years ago, you might, see one occasionally. It's more, you'll see white-beaked dolphins, which are a slightly more offshore species. But yeah, that it was really just the porpoises. But in a relatively short space of time, bottlenose dolphins are now one of the most common species that you'll see. They have increased in numbers. You get sightings multiple times a week, where you might have only seen them a few times in a few months of the year. Now, you can practically see them all year round. They are one of the most kind of charismatic species now, because they leap out of the water, they play with the boats. And the interesting thing about the oral histories is kind of the role that these animals, through kind of expanding in territory, they're helping the whale watching in the region. The oral histories really highlight that that the incredible sight that it is, the inspiration, the awe, and that this didn't exist on this coastline 5 years ago. And they think that the dolphins have come down from the Moray Firth, and that because they're doing quite well and successful, they've just sort of expanded. But it's having a positive impact on local communities, be it informal or formal whale watching. But the other side of it is that there's potentially less sightings now of white-beaked dolphins as they've been pushed out, because obviously bottlenose dolphins are quite a dominant species. They can be quite aggressive, and so that's a really big shift. And it will be interesting to see how the porpoises and the white-beaked dolphins kind of navigate those changes over the coming years. And then I just wanted to kind of conclude, because I'm gonna wrap it up after, because I've run over because of my technical issues. But I just wanted to conclude with this kind of quote from Sean Baxter, and it's a really different kind of perspective to the other two species, and he remembers seeing orca really far off the shore, and he thinks that it would have been around 1976, and it was while he was fishing as a teenager with his brother. And he really emphasized, he was like, we were really far out. I have no idea why we decided to go so far out that day. And he says he never saw them another time, but and that's not surprising. The North Sea orca pod that are around Britain, they're really up in Scotland, and it's really rare for them to come further south. But I mentioned this to Richard Sabin, who is the cetacean expert at the Natural History Museum in London, and he's a principal curator. And as soon as I said it, he said, it's worth looking up the weather conditions of that year and the kind of years around it, and you might be able to work out if there was something there. And as soon as I did, I uncovered, the first thing that came up was that there was terrible storm conditions and really extreme winds and storms in those years, which you can essentially overlay on top of the oral history, and you realize that there's a big chance that these animals were pushed out of their range by the extreme weather. And the reason that I kind of bring this story up is because it reveals how an oral history can highlight the pressures that extreme weather can put on a species. And the reason that's significant is because these animals are also experiencing human pressures. So the weather pressures, the natural kind of the natural things that can happen can push a species out of range. It can devastate a population, and then when you add this to the human pressures, you're kind of compounding on top of each other. And I think we really have to remember that it's not just pollution, noise pollution, entanglement that are threatening these animals. They're facing kind of natural pressures within their own ecosystem, and it has happened with other populations of cetaceans and marine mammals, and it's particularly significant in the case of small populations. So the orca off the North Sea, they're a small and declining pod. The same thing goes for the North Atlantic right whales, who face pressures from shipping and the lobster fisheries, but that when events like El Nino happen, they get pushed further into those, into the kind of they'll get pushed further north, and they move into those shipping lanes, and it has potentially devastating consequences for these small populations. But yeah, I'm going to wrap up there because I know that Fabien and Jérémie have some actual film work to show. So
that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Sophia. What I find amazing about the oral histories is how incredibly vital they are, because obviously scientific research has been very limited up until recently, and so the only way of capturing these sightings and really understanding how these species have fared and where they are is through these oral histories. And so being able to capture them and compare them across the coast and in different regions and areas, because obviously whales travel, cetaceans travel. So one that is being seen in the Basque Coast is the same whale that may be seen a few months later or a few months subsequently before on the Yorkshire Coast. And so capturing these stories and being able to compare them, as you said, and then being able to use historical data like weather patterns really gives us an understanding of these species, and gives us a clue of how we might want to protect them in the future. Really, really fascinating stuff. We do have a couple of questions, but in the interest of time, we'll leave those until the end, so that make sure that we have time for Jérémie and Fabien. So thank you again, Sophia, for that really fascinating presentation. Now my pleasure to introduce Fabien Clouette and Jérémie Brugidou. So I will keep your introductions brief so that you can actually talk. But Fabien is a maritime anthropologist and researcher in Paris. And Jérémie studied in Lyon and holds a PhD in film studies and filmmaking and writing. And they collaborate in many different ways. If you want to find out more about their collaborations and obviously all the work that they've done previously, please check out the Charismatic Encounters page on the World Cetacean Alliance website. You can find out much more information about both Jérémie and Fabien. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to introduce them so that they can present. And they're going to be talking about their documentary film in the Basque Country, and the relationship that exists between Wales and the people that live there. So without further ado, Jérémie and Fabien, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Harry, for the introduction and for the organization of this online event, and thank you, Sophia, for your intervention as well. It was very interesting, and we have a lot of things to discuss after the presentation.
We're gonna share
the screen, yeah. So our main objective, main goal in this project, Franco-British project, is to make a documentary film that was shot mainly last fall during our Basque fieldwork, but we also conducted fieldwork in Brittany, and we're going to present the different steps of this process.
You see our PDF, yeah. Okay.
So at first, when we arrived on the fieldwork in the Basque Country last October, we started interviewing people. A lot of people, a large variety of people working with cetaceans on the French Atlantic coast, especially in the Basque Country. So we conducted these interviews with scientists mainly, with conservationists, volunteers from the National Stranding Network as well, and whale watchers, veterinarians, local historians, museum directors, etc. And this was to learn the ins and outs of the local relationships to these animals before building up a narrative. And there is indeed a special history with whales in the Basque region, since it's supposedly where Europeans started hunting these animals. We have sources that mention the 10th century or the 9th century, so the Middle Ages. And this was because the whales were migrating along the Basque coast from September to May. And some animals at first got stranded on the beaches. And at first people were collecting things on these massive sources of energy and materials as well. Bones, fat for the oil.
And yeah, the first sources are churches and abbeys that are buying oil from the Basque Country to light up the abbeys and the churches. So the lighting of the first religious places in France, all the way up to Normandy, were according to some sources from the 9th and 10th centuries, lit by whale oil from the Basque Country.
And there is this idea that comes up often on our fieldwork, that the whales were the light of big cities in France and in Europe, actually. So there was this first moment of history in between the relationship in between whales and humans in the Basque Country.
Yeah. When the whales were actually seen from the coast,
yeah,
which is also a big difference with what Sophia described, and which we could talk about, is that nowadays in the Basque Country you very, very seldom see whales from the coast, if ever. Whereas at this time it was common to see whales passing by, and there were these observation posts called Atalaya, which were built up to watch the migration of the whales and to hunt them from the coast.
Yeah, and then it followed the development of capitalism and industry and international trade, because the Basque created techniques and types of vessels that could cross the Atlantic, and because they were looking for cod, and while looking for cod on the other side of the Atlantic, they found other right whales and started exploiting the right whales
as they drove them to extinction on the French coast.
Yeah.
So that goes up all the way into the 15th, 16th century, where it really peaks in the mid of the 16th century. So especially in Newfoundland, this is the high moment of Basque whaling, and then from then on, it just kind of plunges with the decrease of whale populations and with European wars and with the France losing some fishing grounds with some treaties, which kind of brings the fishing industry to a stopping point for the Basque area.
Yeah. However, there is a strong legacy that still is very present in the Basque maritime heritage, and
so besides the strong this strong history, which seems like very, very important for the Basque region, and with a lot of iconography that testifies of this past whaling industry and this very, very close relationships to whales. Today, the main markers of this are some symbolic elements of in the cities.
Cultural signs,
especially the signs of the cities. They're the emblems that represent the cities, and we can find in the cities, which we kind of scouted all over the Basque region, on the coastal Basque region, to find these signs in the middle of the cities. There are whales everywhere, except at sea, they're not seen at sea from the coast, but they're everywhere in the cities.
A lot of representations, and it's very present in the culture of this territory.
And it's interesting to notice, and with something we noticed from the beginning, is that there's this very strong heritage, but at the same time, nobody realizes that there are actually whales today migrating along the Basque coast. And so there's this very strong history, but at the same time, there's a strong disconnection from the ocean. And so it's kind of this ambivalent relationship to the whaling, to the observation of whales that we were interested in at the beginning. And at the difference maybe also of the Yorkshire region, there are very few whale watching boats in the Basque Country. There are actually only officially 2.
Yeah.
And we began with one, which is Explore Océan, which does whale watching along the coast from Hendaye.
And our interest was not to film the animals, but to film the watchers. We, as anthropologists, we were watching the watchers in a way, and we were interested in the way people were watching, were tracking the animals, to just discriminate the singularity of this posture at sea, and it was something that was we found very interesting as filmmakers as well.
Yeah, also because the boat of Explore Océan is called the Atalaï, which is so taking the name of the buildings that were used to sight the whales in order to hunt them. And Explore Océan considers that they're tracking whales in order to hunt them with the cameras. Yeah. And so we were interested in this kind of legacy of this sensorial legacy of what it means to track marine animals and to find them in order here not to kill them and use their physiological energy, but to use their affective and their emotional energy through images and sightseeing. And so we wanted to
show you
some very short
images,
excerpts of the film. So I'm going to try to launch it, and I hope the sound is going to be okay. Yeah. So these are some excerpts of some first stages of the editing process. So we'll start with an excerpt on Explore Océan. Wait, I have to change my sharing. I'm just going to change this. Share screen. So now you see something different, right?
Yes, now we do.
Good. Very good.
And so if you don't have sound, just say you don't have sound, but I think you should.
Ils sont derrière nous et ils vont vers notre gauche, enfin sur notre gauche.
Ouais, ils en font un tour ou pas?
Je pense qu'il y a deux groupes en fait.
Je peux un peu garder ça.
They're trying to locate the group of.
Deuxième groupe, il est où? Il y avait un groupe à l'avant tout bas, et il y en a un qui est passé à l'arrière et qui est passé vers notre gauche.
Ok, bon, bah, je vais pas faire demi-tour, je vais garder encore un peu ça.
Non, il y avait un groupe devant et un groupe à l'arrière déjà. Ils sont où? C'est le groupe de devant, on le voit plus.
Ok, bon. Et revois devant.
Il y a devant. Ok.
So it's kind of this idea to build a narrative and to build a cinematographic tension around what it means to cite a charismatic animal, and how this comes with a progression of human intelligence to track these animals, and human sensitivity to get in contact with these animals through sight and sound. And there is also another moment when humans encounter these animals. Unfortunately, we also were caught up by recent events on the Atlantic coast, more north in Brittany, where there were several strandings of whales in the month of September. And so we had the opportunity to follow very closely these strandings and the management of these strandings.
And the work of scientists around these tragic events.
And these are also moments where watchers are watching, and then there's this very intense gaze of these charismatic that these charismatic animals trigger among humans. So here is another moment of the film, which is sad, but a reality, and which is a very important part of the film. And this is just a sighting of the stranded whale, and we did not go into the more graphic elements, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, filming these moments was probably the biggest, and it is still now with the editing process. It's probably the biggest challenge for us filmmakers in the process of making this film. And because in a way, unfortunately, whales are more often encountered than dead than alive, and these strandings catch more and more attention and raise conflicts, and it was very interesting for us to work around these conflicts with our tools. Conflicts about responsibility, cause, action. What should we do to prevent these tragic events? And one of the strandings that we filmed was an even more spectacular moment, since the animal remained alive on the beach. So different people from various institutions with diverse goals, like NGOs, state biodiversity agencies, scientists, volunteers, gathered around the whale and disputed the direction to take with this animal. The main point of disagreement between these different parties concerns the definition of animal welfare, because for some, everything must be done to, of course, to save the animal, and meaning to keep it alive. And for some others, animal welfare is, in some cases, putting an end to its suffering, and in a way letting nature do its work. So for us, it raised an important question of the ambivalent relations our societies nourish with the death of animals, wild animals, and of the confusion between protection and intervention, and in a way to rewilding operations as well, since every action led in the sense of caring for wild animals could also be a transformation of the wild itself. So, of course, it also questions important terms for anthropologists, such as charismatic, the wild, nature, and how these terms are intertwined in our contemporary relations to environments. And what struck us was that these encounters are moving moments, and the people involved in these moments show very interesting contradictions to analyze and to film. Scientists, for instance, tend to follow an imperative of detachment and to keep a distance between the animals and them. But this imperative is operative in theory, not in practice, and we focused on the stories involving effects and the inner contradictions that are linked to the protection of charismatic wild animals.
For example, here one of the scientists and a member of the Réseau National Échouage, which deals with the strandings on the coast of France nationally, was at the same time he has the function of being a sort of detached scientist, of observing things from a distance. And on the other hand, he couldn't help but being moved by the gaze of the dying whale on the beach, and he kept coming back at the emotion that it had raised on the site. And something that a lot of the scientists talk to us about is that they're often seen as very detached, cold, and uncaring humans in regard with these charismatic animals. But they keep telling us how deeply emotional it is for them, but at the same time that they have some kind of function to serve within this whole process of dealing with these animals when they come to shore, especially.
What we saw is that they're constantly they're always on the front line. So they're they're the ones that are exposed the most.
So we were interested in these moments, whether it be of the cutting up of the whales, and how fascinated people are with whale strandings, and at the same time how sad it is, but at the same time how fascinating it is to encounter these gigantic animals. How difficult it is to take these corpses off a beach, and at the same time how precious it is for science and for conservation to be able to recuperate some elements that could indicate the causes of disease, the causes of mortality, and to be able to protect the species as such, and not the individual. So these are really a lot of important contradictions and tensions that we located on the field, and that were very interesting for the film.
And it's also an invisible world, just like the ones of the whales, the science world. So it echoed in a way.
Yeah, and to finish on something more.
Yeah, because the film is charged with intense and tragic material. We searched for an ending that could show the very vivid interactions of wildlife that are actually occurring off the coast of the Atlantic coast in France. And we filmed actually 2 days ago a very special underwater sequence. And in the film, people, Jérémie said, share very moving stories about encounters with animals, charismatic animals. And finally, in the end, we offer an encounter shared by the characters of the film and the audience.
So these are with pilot whales, and it was also important for us to actually deal with the controversial subject of going in the water with the animals, which is of course a very vivid element of tension also concerning whale watching. Those who go in the water and those who refuse to go in the water with the animals, and it's something that comes up a lot in the film. And we really wanted to give a sight of this other side of the story, of what it means to go in the water, how it can be done, and of course the question that has also been raised in the comments of, can whale watching be something that is actually positive or not? It's constantly present, and this is something we've discussed a lot, and we'd be happy to talk about it more also with Sophia. And there are so many answers and so many good and worst ways to do things. So it's interesting to compare how this is done.
And one element is the creation of rules of charters, actually.
So anyways, thank you for your attention, and we're done.
Thank you so much, Jérémie and Fabien. This was absolutely fascinating, and the footage that you've captured, I certainly can't wait to see the full documentary. And I know we were talking yesterday, and you have something like 60 hours of footage, which I think must be equally fascinating to look through if somebody had 3 days spare. What I found really amazing about the footage that you showed there was even without seeing the animal, the emotion that you could feel was palpable. You had the emotion of anticipation of waiting to see a whale. You had the excitement. You had the joy of having seen it. All of that was present without even seeing the animal at all. And also with the stranding, you could see curiosity, but discomfort. And it was all very present again, without actually, even without seeing the animal. I found it absolutely fascinating to see it through those eyes, and made it all the more powerful.
And we actually entitled, for now, the film, we entitled it temporarily Whale Fire, because we wanted to actually link it to the fact that whale oil was used for lighting the cities, some European cities.
Energy,
like as a core energy. And we wanted to think about how this energy transformed through time into a more emotional energy. and how today whale fire was something that sparked inside every individual that encounters a whale, and how we can think of an energetics, a sort of politics of energetics, and whether this energy be material or symbolic or emotional, and how this economy of energies can actually give sense of our relationship to these animals.
It's absolutely fascinating, and I also liked the point that you made about this sense of detachment that these scientists appeared to have, and it's something that's common in scientific research, but also in the work that I do and my colleagues do in animal welfare. Is that, you know, often you are confronted with really difficult, emotionally tough situations, and that detachment is an ability that you develop to enable you to actually do the work. You have to be able to do that, and often, sometimes I've given the analogy of looking at the issue through a lens of a camera because it creates that distance. And I think it's just a coping mechanism that you have to have in order to do this kind of work. But it was really interesting that was something that you picked up as well. We do have some questions. I know we're over time, but if it's okay with the three of you, if you're happy to answer a few questions,
sure.
We can dive into those. So the first question is for Sophia, and it's from Caroline B. Hello from the USA, she says. A question for the end of your presentation. Is there a connection between some of these changes in value and awareness and the concept of shifting baseline syndrome?
Thanks for your question, and I'm quite glad that someone mentioned shifting baseline syndrome, because it is something that I think about quite a lot in my work. It hasn't been a major focus of the research in terms of Yorkshire, but it's kind of getting there as I untangle the oral histories and the kind of historical records more. But it was a really big part of my PhD research about strandings in the Pacific Northwest, and you know, it's a term that's come out of science, but it's a really significant term, I think, in environmental history, and it's really starting. I mean, one thing I didn't mention in my talk was that there's quite a lot of records from the 19th century of sort of the wildlife of Yorkshire, or the marine wildlife of Yorkshire, and it's these historical accounts, and minke whales are referenced as one of the most common species to visit the shores, and white-beaked dolphins. You know, that these are the two species that you were seeing back then, obviously along with harbour porpoises. So minke whales were clearly, you know, they were clearly there at some point. So what happened between those sort of 60, 70 years, and you know, how can we kind of weigh that up against the impact of whaling, and you know, yeah, I mean, shifting baseline syndrome is really significant. It's just now I'm trying to work out actually kind of the trajectory of these different species, and understand what is new, what isn't new, what's kind of maybe a return. But yeah, it's certainly something that you know, I'd really like to kind of apply to the work that I'm doing right now.
Thanks, Sophia. That was great. And thank you for the question, Caroline. We have another question. I'll switch them back and forth. We do have another question for you, Sophia, but I'll switch to one for Jérémie and Fabien from Scuba Squidney, who is asking, do you think that if smartphones were given to a generation far back in time, they would also stand on the beach and film? Or is it a new psyche that we've created with phones? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard testimonies of people saying that even when they were young and children and there were strandings, they weren't taking pictures with phones, but they were actually sliding on the corpse, or just piggybacking on the corpse. So I think it's always been a fascinating phenomenon. And now I guess this fascination is linked to our means of sharing these fascinations, and so it goes through images and social media and stuff like that.
And there is also a tradition of collecting things around these stranded animals, and smartphones can be a way to collect memories or images, and not bones, but just actual images.
Yeah, because from the time when they used to scavenge the corpses to recuperate every single piece of it to make everything from using the bones, the meat, the fat, the baleines, etc., to more recently just taking off a little piece for a souvenir, or if it's a sperm whale taking a tooth, or if it's a baleen whale taking some baleines for a souvenir. I guess that still happens, apparently, we've been told, but now it's mostly just taking a snap and just taking this.
And as filmmakers, we are also interested to film the screens, and especially when the smartphones are filming animals, and we think that it's also probably to put like something to mediate the encounter in between the animal and the human. So it's always interesting to film that in particular.
That's really fascinating.
Can I just sort of add to that?
Yeah, please, Sophia.
That in the sort of 1600s, you just have this proliferation of images from the Flanders, so the Netherlands and Belgium, and just remarkable images of these crowds and carriages being driven over, these sand dunes to get down to these animals. And then you have in the UK, in London actually specifically, when whales stranded, there would be visual representations of them and lots of written accounts of them. So I think it's just all these, it's just a different form of trying to capture them with the latest technology, because those Dutch ones, the Flemish ones, they were engraving. That was the height of image making at that time.
Yeah, it's very interesting to put in perspective these image capturing with smartphones, with an art history and cultural history of this fascination. For sure, it's great.
And it definitely speaks to understanding human attitudes and behaviors culturally, like generally the shift in attitudes and behaviors of people about everything, and how that reflects on how they choose to interact with these charismatic creatures as well. And it's just interesting to see that to see that shift. It's a really interesting question. Thank you for that, Scuba Squidney. We have another question for Sophia, which is also from Scuba Squidney, but specifically to you. Hello from Vancouver Island. Whale watching opinions on the West Coast seem split between fun, exciting activity and harmful tourism. What are the views on the Yorkshire Coast?
That is a really great question, and I am aware of kind of some of the issues around Vancouver Island, and kind of actually that whole west coast of North America. That it's there's a thin line kind of between responsible whale watching and where it's starting to potentially be kind of overexploited, and there's too many boats in some places, and it's really interesting kind of comparing it to Yorkshire, because Yorkshire is a really nascent whale watching activity, and even though it's been around since 2006, it hasn't sort of exploded, and I think that's probably because of the species. It's not humpbacks and orcas, which are, considered the exciting species to go. They breach. The orcas, you can see their dorsal fins and tail slapping, and they're kind of the exciting species that are really fun to go and watch, and they're I've heard people call them the money makers almost. But going, in terms of the Yorkshire coast, we have the minke whales, and they are, they're not a showy animal, but I've seen them off of Whitby, and it's incredible. I mean, it's up there in some of the best whale watching. It's just you have to have a different kind of mindset, and then the other species are obviously these smaller cetaceans, so bottlenose dolphins, white-beaked dolphins, and the porpoises. And really, the porpoises don't really hang around the boats at all. So I think almost because of the species that at the moment it's quite a low level of whale watching, and it's more so people who already kind of know about it, are already interested in natural history, and there's also quite strict, the regulations are pretty strict, and because a lot of it is being a lot of the whale watching is being done by fishermen and ex-fishermen to kind of diversify, because fishing is obviously it's an industry that's facing a lot of trouble in the North Sea. It's not necessarily bringing the same income, and whale and wildlife watching kind of takes advantage of those maritime skills that they already have, and they know how to act on water already, and they kind of almost keep each other in check, and they're not going around chasing dolphins down and whales down, and I think at the moment it's quite a positive, it's quite small scale, but it feels that it's there's something quite genuine about it. I don't know if genuine's the right word, but it very much feels like there's a real effort to try and make sure that it evolves in this kind of more positive and responsible way, rather than having to backtrack and sort of make up for the kind of mistakes. So yeah, but that's a really good question.
It was, and it's such an important point there. I mean, it's an area of work that we focus on a lot at the WCA, and obviously responsible whale watching is a big part of the work that we do through our global guidelines, through the WCA approved responsible whale watching operator scheme. And so it is a really relevant point. We're talking about protecting these animals and giving people the opportunity to see them, but obviously that has a negative effect. And so getting that balance right, making sure that people have the opportunity, but it's well managed and never compromises the welfare of these animals, is going to be a balance that I think we're going to have to see more and more in the future as these opportunities and places where people can go and see these animals become more and more prevalent. So it's something we really have to keep a check on as a sector and across the industry. But yeah, really important question. Thank you.
And it was interesting in our field, because there's so few people that know about the fact that there are so many different kinds of whales that come through the very close to the Basque coast, including orcas, including sperm whales, including some of those exciting species. Mm-hmm. And the question is always that, should they know or not? Mm-hmm. should people know about it or not? Because there's, at the same time, people who are committed to marine conservation in these areas, they want to inform people that very close to them there are all these very different. There's this incredible biodiversity, and that it has to be protected and cherished and cared for. And at the same time, there's this idea that if people realize how much biodiversity there is just here, it's going to create desire to actually do these businesses, and those that are done currently are very well done and very
in close relation to scientific.
Yeah, very responsible, well, and very linked to scientific research and to a concern primarily about protection and conservation. Mm-hmm. and you never know when this impulse is going to become uncontrollable and how it's going to, what it's going to lead to. So it's a very difficult question and interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. In the interest of time, I know we are 20 minutes beyond what we were supposed to be. Thank you so much, all of you, for participating in this. It's just such a fascinating project. You know, the WCA is really proud to be a partner in this. For anybody that's listening, you have the URL there. You can find out more about the project by visiting the WCA website and the Charismatic Encounters project page, which will be populated with the documentary film when it comes out, which will obviously be available through other channels as well, research papers, and as this project continues through the duration of its lifespan and hopefully beyond, that'll be the place that you can find out more and more about this. But I would like to thank our speakers, Sophia, Fabien, and Jérémie, and our partners at Leeds and Paris Nanterre for participating in this project and for this event. Thank you so much, guys, for such brilliant presentations. It was really, really interesting. Mickey, who is behind the scenes, our comms manager, who is pulling up all of these URLs and questions on our screen and making this look very professional and slick. Thank you, Mickey, for organizing all of this. And of course, thank you for all of you out there for attending this event and for your questions and for your comments. This has been recorded, so we will be posting it up, so you can either relive this experience again if you enjoyed it, or you can share it with people who didn't have the opportunity to join it live. So thank you very much again to the speakers and for you for joining us. And please do check out the website.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Mickey, as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for hosting it and for bearing with my technical difficulties.